Hey guys, Argent here. So one of the most misunderstood things I think in modern Catholicism is what Catholic social teaching is. And it's something that profoundly affected me. Actually, as we go through this, it's what kind of brought me to most of my kind of like edgy positions. And it's often kind of the other way for people. It really was something that made me take moral questions a lot more seriously and kind of just look at the world in a different way. And it's kind of been corrupted, and it's used as part of something called liberation theology. Now, liberation theology is largely a product of Latin America, which is where various clerics basically became communists, and they invented or came up with scriptural justification or religious justification to give cover to commies in Latin America. And it's kind of used by the left as a club to beat the right, to just say that Catholicism is inherently left-wing. Now, Catholic social teaching is neither left nor right-wing. It is just quintessentially Catholic. Now, Catholicism on a whole, being a religion, is kind of right-wing, just because the modern left, at least, is just radically anti-religion. But we're going to put that aside for the minute, concepts of left and right, and we're just going to talk about what it is. So I'm going to read through this article, and I'm going to give my commentary. So, Jesus rescued the adulteress from stoning, ate with tax collectors and prostitutes, spoke to the Samaritan woman at the well, and healed the sick and the sinner. He promised the most severe punishments for those who were indifferent to the plight of the poor. Sounds like a commie, doesn't he? Well, it's kind of misunderstood. I mean, Jesus is very compassionate on one hand, but he comes in at the end of the world, and a double-edged sword comes out of his mouth, and he just destroys evil. He casts, in the book of Revelation, he casts the wicked into the lake of fire. So he kind of has these both sides to him. But then again, he's God, and God has both the merciful and the just side to him. So this is something from the Gospel of Matthew. Depart from me, you accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. A stranger, and you gave me no welcome. Naked, and you gave me no clothing. Ill and in prison, and you did not care for me. Then they will answer and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger, naked or ill or in prison, and not minister to your needs? He will answer to them, Amen, I say to you, what you did not do for one of these least ones, you did not do for me. And those who go off to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. So Jesus is saying, and this is a long-standing thing in Christianity, that we see God in the poorest and most wretched. And this is kind of a recurrent thing. I think what's important to keep in mind, if Christianity really seems to idealize the poor, is my interpretation of it is it's much easier to have faith and to put your absolute trust in God when you don't have anything. When you have lots of money, when you have lots of toys, lots of nice things. I'm not saying these are bad. No, people having material wealth is a good thing. But these things can make you feel you don't need God because you don't have a constant crisis in your life. If you think about famous people or just people in your life, a lot of times they come to God when they're suffering. So there's virtue in suffering, because in the virtue in suffering is you experience what Jesus experienced. And it also teaches you compassion. So Christians through the ages have sought to take the example and words of Jesus to heart and live with them in social settings very different from ancient Palestine. Catholic social teaching is an offspring of this effort. It was really codified after the Enlightenment, when political ideology was really coming to light, as to be a uniquely Catholic way of looking at the world. Neither really explicitly, I guess you could say, feudal or liberal. Certain teachings of the Catholic Church are very articulate and relatively clear. We believe in God, we believe in Jesus, truly God and truly a human, we believe in the seven sacraments, etc., etc. Catholics of goodwill disagree about the meaning of Catholic social teaching, and especially about how to apply it in a given situation. Moreover, there is ongoing development of doctrine on social questions, as seen in the writings of various pontiffs, from Pope Leo XIII, Charter of Catholic Social Thought, Rerum Novarum, through Blessed John Paul, Pope John the 23rd's Pacem in Terris, and Pope John the 22nd's. Sorry, I'm not good at reading these. Well, you'll say, well, is this progressivism? Not really. I mean, things just change. Like, we didn't have technologies, we didn't have really wage labor as it was understood today until the 19th century. Changes to technology, political structures, etc., have necessitated coming up with a Catholic answer, if you will, to these questions. So linking with changing social conditions and, like I said, changing social conditions and deepening understandings of both the work of God in history and his ethical principles. Nevertheless, this complexity can be summarized imperfectly in terms of 7 key principles of Catholic social teaching. So let's go through this and see if this is really commie thought. Respect for the human person. Oh no! The foundation of Catholic social thought is the proper understanding and value of the human person. In the words of John Paul II, the foundation of Catholic social teaching is a correct view of the human person and of his unique value, insomuch as man is the only creature on earth with which God willed for itself. That is, the only creature with an immortal soul, who exists for his own purpose. God has imprinted his image and likeness onto man, conferring upon him incomparable dignity. In a sense, all Catholic social teachings articulate the ethical implications of a proper understanding of the dignity of the person. The concept of human rights has been adopted by popes to communicate that each and every human being as a children of God has certain immunities from harm by others and merits certain kinds of treatment. Now, I think it's important to keep in mind the definition of human rights is a little different. In contrast to modern humanism, there are a lot of responsibilities in Catholicism. In kind of modern liberal thought, you don't have responsibilities, you just have rights. In this case, though, there's a lot of both. There's a lot of issues that are very much up in the air. For instance, it's not infallibly defined one way or another as to capital punishment. The judgment of the individual. In particular, though, the Church has been forceful in defending the right to life of every single human being. Opposition to abortion and euthanasia. That's because it's the murder of the innocent, and maybe I'll do something about that other as well. And for respecting human dignity in other areas such as education, poverty, and immigration. Now, immigration is an interesting issue. There's a lot of different thoughts on this. Some people say that we have to accept immigrants. John Paul the 22nd said that we should be cautious. John Paul II said we should be cautious about this, because more important than the right to immigrate is the right not to immigrate. Because in my view, the dislocation that happens when you have mass immigration, not just to the native population but to the people, is a disrespect of the human person. Living in someone else's society and someone else's dream is not good for the person. Like, if you look at, and this is kind of how I became a nationalist, when I looked at how blacks lived in America when I went there a couple times, I said, well, this is not respectful to the human person. They're trapped in someone else's dream in someone else's world, and they're this kind of miserable, ruined people. So it's a complicated issue, but at its core, it's the respect for human life, and viewing that as an inherently valuable thing. Let's see here. Nevertheless, this apparent consensus conceals very strong disagreements about the nature and scope of these rights. One of the most controversial of these areas in the present culture is the understanding of the family. Catholic social teaching point 2 on the family. The human person is not simply an individual, but is also a member of a community. Failing to acknowledge the community aspect leads to radical individualism. A full understanding of the person considers the social aspects of the individual So just to keep in mind, like as I said, we have this concept of individual human rights, but we also have this concept of collective rights, and more importantly, collective responsibilities. The liberal says you have a right to much stuff, but you don't have a responsibility. And here they're saying, well, you have a responsibility to your family, to your spouse, to reproduce, etc. The first social consideration in order of importance is the family. It is the basic unit of society. That is the Catholic Church's traditional teaching. The basic unit of society is not the individual, it's the family. In Francoist Spain, the husband would vote on behalf of his wife and his children. And it predates and in a sense surpasses all other societies in a community because the family always comes first. Catholic social teaching emphasizes the importance of the family, in particular the importance in fostering of stable marriages where children are welcomed and educated. The wider social network plays an important role in promoting the family. In particular, the Catholic Church has spoken of a family wage whereby one breadwinner can adequately support spouse and children. Because it's the general belief that the duty of the mother is to raise the children, and that's the best for the children and for the society. So Catholic social teaching tends to advocate maybe having a slightly smaller workforce, but paying them more, so the man can support his family. Makes sense. Social conditions either contribute to the stabilization or destabilization of the family structure. Social conditions that destabilize include mandatory and unreasonably long work hours, a toxic social culture that denigrates fidelity, legal dissolution of marriage between one man and one woman, and excessive taxation. I know it all seems pretty straightforward. Like you might say some of this is kind of like, once again, kind of left-wing stuff, but it's not about that. It comes from a religious understanding of respect for the human being. And in this case, respect for the family, etc. Because if your father works all the time, he can't spend time with his children. It's not fair to them, but it's not really fair to him either. Because he needs some time to himself to pursue his own hobbies and his own interests. Excessive taxation also can get in the way of the family. So a lot of Catholic governments, the explicitly Catholic ones, will implement a lot of benefits for couples. In Poland and in some other countries, they provide a bonus and major tax breaks to encourage people to have children and tend to support things like pregnancy leave for both men and women. So then we have respect for, as Stephen Molyneux would put it, natural property rights. Catholic social teaching has defended the right to private property against the claim that the state should own all things. Okay, so that's not communism. It can't be communism if private property is defended. Catholicism has always defended the right to private property. It speaks of a wider social responsibility, and at times when we do need like welfare programs, etc. But ultimately, your house is your house. Much earlier, St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor himself, whose writings are central importance in understanding the foundations of Catholic social teaching. Actually, he wrote against immigration because he said it interrupted the correct functioning of a community. So this is from Thomas Aquinas. First, because every man is more careful to procure what is for himself alone than that which is common to many or to all, since each one would shirk the labor and leave to another that which concerns the community, as happens where there is a great number of servants. So this is why private property is important. So basically, you take care of your own stuff. If you own a car, you take care of it. You don't go over normally and take care of your neighbor's car unless they do something for you. That's kind of a common theme in libertarian thought, that if you privatize something, people take care of it. Well, I don't think that makes sense in an open-ended context. Broadly speaking, if you own your house, you're going to take better care of it than if you don't own your house. Secondly, because human affairs are conducted in a more orderly fashion if each man is charged with taking care of some particular thing himself, whereas there would be confusion if everyone had to look after any one thing intermittently. So basically, if the government just owned everything and ran the entire economy, it would be impossibly complex and no human would be able to do it. Thirdly, because a more peaceful state is ensured to man if each one is contented with his own. Hence, it is observed that quarrels arise more frequently when there is no division. So basically, just a utilitarian reason. It leads to riots, etc. Private property also helps to secure human freedom. A person's ability to act freely is greatly hindered if he is not allowed to own anything. Indeed, keep in mind, freedom is a big thing in Catholicism, but also responsibility. Freedom is often described as the freedom to do the right thing. Indeed, without possessions of any kind, a person can be reduced to slavery in which labor is not rewarded, and speaking against the exercise of state authority is taken at enormous risk. The right to private property, however, is not unconditional. May a person take what is legally the property of another to secure survival? This question was proposed in Les Miserables. Does Jean Valjean, who steals bread to feed his starving family, deserve to be punished? St. Thomas Aquinas says no. In cases where there is no other way to secure the basic necessities for human survival, taking them from those who have an abundance is not wrongful, because these are basic necessities are rightfully theirs as human beings. Thomas Aquinas speaks of cases of need, not want. At issue here are situations of famine or disaster where people's lives are at risk for lack of basic necessities such as food, shelter, or clothing, not big screen TVs, DVD players, etc. No matter how great the desire for them, however, such reallocation must be a last resort. That is, if you have to steal to survive, that's morally permissible, because human life is worth more than private property rights, but it has to be a last resort. If the necessities could be provided through one's own work or through voluntary assistance of others, be it government agencies or private charities. So there's a legal and a good way to go about doing it. Catholic social teaching also notes that private property can become a kind of idol, leading people to assess the goal and meaning of human life simply in terms of dollar and cents. The right to private property also comes with responsibilities, in particular the responsibility to care for and promote the common good. I know that seems pretty logical and straightforward. Maybe we're expecting something like radical, but that just seems pretty common sense. So the common good, which was defined by Pope John XXIII as the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and easily. That sounds pretty straightforward to me. This good is common because only together in a community, and not simply as isolated individuals, is it possible to enjoy, achieve, and spread this good. Well, that makes sense, because without kind of civilization, you don't get advanced things like literature, like music. You don't get higher standards of living. You don't get comparative advantage and specialization, etc. Sometimes the common good is misunderstood to mean simply the common desires or interests of the multitude. The common good is not simply the sum total of particular interests. Rather, it involves an assessment and integration of these interests on the basis of a balanced hierarchy of values. Ultimately, it demands a correct understanding of the dignity and rights of the person. The common good, in other words, is not simply what people happen to want, but what would be authentically good for the people. The Catholic Church has frequently defended guys like Franco or Mussolini, or they deny it nowadays, or Pinochet, because that was the most in the common good. The common good, in other words, is, yes, but would authentically good for people is social conditions that enable human flourishing. Human flourishing is multifaceted. Human includes a physical dimension of health and psychological well-being. If a country does not have sufficient pure drinking water, nourishing food, and a relatively toxin-free environment, human beings will not be able to achieve their full potential. Moreover, human flourishing has an intellectual dimension that can be helped or hampered by educational opportunities or the lack thereof. Finally, each of us bears an ethical and moral dimension that will be frustrated without the avoidance of vice and the cultivation of virtue. The common good includes all these elements, the loss of any one of which can hinder our seeking of fulfillment. The common good is not the greatest good, because the greatest good is God. The idea of utopianism is strictly rejected in Catholicism, which is kind of somewhere where differences from some other stuff. Let's see. Participation, solidarity are two other fundamental principles of Catholic social teaching. Citizens, either as an individual or in association with others, whether directly or through representation, contribute to the cultural, economic, political, and social life of the civil community to which he belongs. Participation is a duty to be fulfilled consciously by all, with respect and with a view to the common good. So this is kind of how I justify nationalism. Not like hateful nationalism, but just wanting to preserve your people. I think solidarity and participation requires a rather homogenous society. You can't have solidarity in a society where no one speaks the same language, no one has the same values, no one comes from the same background. Let's see here. Yeah, so that's to say so solidarity, I think, is kind of a justification for not always having immigration. So subsidiarity. So subsidiarity is basically pretty straightforward. It's the idea that things should be done on the lowest level possible. That is, if the federal government doesn't have to do something, if it can be, if the federal government in a state or provincial government can do something just about as well, it should be done in the provincial government. If it can't be done on the provincial government, it should be done at a lower level. Things should be done as close to the people as possible, and government should get smaller the higher it goes. So pretty straightforward, just kind of classic, kind of conservative decentralization kind of. Also, I guess you could also say charity begins at home. You should try and work in your own community before you go and work abroad. Once again, this kind of says to me, well, you can't have a global government because of the principle of solidarity, subsidiarity. I think it's pretty obvious that the global government just can't work, so we need to devolve power and maintain power in the respective nations. So then we have respect for the work and the worker. Let's see here. Human work participates in and reflects God's creative and providential care of the universe. Even before the fall, man is created to till and keep the Garden of Eden, to imitate God's work in creation through human work. After the fall, work becomes at times a toilsome task, but work remains part of man's vocation from God. Any honest work can be sanctified, offered to God, and made holy through the intentions of the worker and the excellence of the work done. So work is a good thing. Creating things is a good thing. However, workers are not mere drones, means the production of capital for owners, but must be respected and accorded the opportunity to form unions to secure collectively a just compensation. In Catholic social teaching, the right of association is a natural right. So they oppose the formation legislation blocking unions. The state is bound to protect natural rights, not to destroy them, and if it forbids its citizens to form associations, it contradicts the very principle of its own existence. The Catholic social movement has always been very active with workers. If we look at a lot of the anti-communist movements, in particular Solidarity in Poland, that was largely founded by working class Poles who were deeply Catholic in nature, who were protesting against the oppressive totalitarian government they had. Pursue peace and care for the poor. Peace is the tranquility of order. War between nations may be necessary at times, but solely in order to restore peace. So, as opposed to pacifism rejects outright waging war as morally evil for a variety of reasons. Realism in the context of the ethics of war contains that war has no rules whatsoever, aside from perhaps survival of the fittest. Just war is a mean between pacifism and realism, a mean by that has been explicitly adopted and appealed to by most contemporary governments. So basically, that's just minimal civilian casualties. The war has to have a clear objective, and there has to be a real chance of it succeeding, I think, are the three parts of it. Recent discussions have addressed the question of whether a preemptive war can be justified according to traditional just war theory. Other discussions questions, given contemporary technology, whether a just war is possible. So that's kind of open to the individual. Pope Benedict even said that good Catholics can disagree on the morality of the Iraq War. So peace involves a just ordering of society, which includes justice for the poor, etc. So as noted, Catholic social teaching does not address exactly how everything should be done in society. It can be done privately, it can be voluntarily, it can be done through social action, through government action, through other things. More likely, it requires a combination of different aspects and an integration of the various aspects of society into a greater body, much like the body of Christ. So that is essentially what Catholic social teaching is. Like I said, it's not particularly kind of classically right or left wing. I'd say it's more right wing just because it's religious in nature and because it emphasizes the family and some other stuff. But it's really just an attempt to apply basically Catholicism to social areas. And even if it's twisted, etc., it's something I take seriously and it's a core part of my political philosophy. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll post a link to this. This is RG signing out.